This is Tommy Cooper, the comedian that died on stage.
What was the real magic of the man, apart from his act, of course?
Because he was an actual funny man. I mean, when you were with him, you were laughing all the time. Everybody gathered around him. I loved him, I think, more than lots of the other comedians.
Over the years, there have been many beloved comedians who have lost their lives while touring on the road performing stand-up comedy, but it is much more rare and sad for a comedian to die during a live performance. There are a few times that comedians have been documented losing their lives on stage during a performance, but there's one that stands out from all the rest, and that is Tommy Cooper. The reason it stands out is because it was live on television and millions of people would see him in his final moments before he tragically lost his life on stage. Tommy Cooper was one of Britain's finest comedic acts to ever live, and his death was certainly a horrifying tragedy. If you're curious about comedian Tommy Cooper and the moments leading up to and following his tragic death on stage while performing his act, then you've come to the right place. I will be discussing this devastating event and what likely caused Tommy Cooper's untimely demise to take place at the time that it did. If that sounds interesting to you, then let's hop right into it and get down to the nitty-gritty details. Before we get into the incident, I will be providing a little bit of backstory as to who Tommy Cooper is, just in case you're not familiar with him and his style of comedy. Tommy was an English comedian and magician born in Glamorgan, Wales back in 1921. He had a pretty ordinary childhood with a loving family, and he found a deep love for theater and performance at a very young age. When Tommy was just 8 years old, his aunt bought him a magic set that came with several gimmicks, props, and decks of cards that he could use to impress his family and friends. He would spend hours a day honing this craft and perfecting the art of misdirection so that he could do it to anybody who sat in front of him for a trick. In the words of B.O.B., Tommy certainly had the magic in him, and so did the rest of his family. In fact, Tommy's brother David would open D&Z Cooper's Magic Shop in Berkshire, England, which was a place that Tommy could continue to hone his craft. After graduating from school at 19 years old, Tommy would find himself joining the British Army as a trooper. Even as a member of the British Armed Forces, his love of magic and illusions would shine through. It was in the military when Tommy would start to really figure out his act and his voice, which would end up being a series of magic tricks laced with one-liners and jokes all throughout his performance. It was just another element of misdirection he had in his entertainment arsenal.
You know, I'm very soft-hearted, really. I am, honestly. I wouldn't harm a fly. And I never use these fly killers, never. I use this. Instant starch. Doesn't kill them, but they glide out the window like that.
During a deployment in Cairo, Egypt, he would find himself donning the famous fez that he would end up wearing in all of his performances throughout his career. He had grabbed it from a waiter that was passing by, and the crowd would get a really big laugh from this exchange. And from there on out, Tommy would always wear the red fez when performing, which would turn his hat into an icon of 20th century comedy. Tommy was also a very large man, standing at 6 feet 4 inches tall, which gave him the presence of a lumbering jester prancing up and down the stage. After his exit from the military in 1947, Tommy would continue performing and really start to hone his craft with repetition. Sometimes he would perform upwards of 50 or more times on stage in a single week. Eventually, he would join the Magic Circle in London, which granted him even more stage time and opportunities to improve as an entertainer. One element of Tommy's act that would make him stand out a lot was his willingness to fail his tricks on purpose in an attempt to make the audience laugh, and he would almost always succeed in his attempt. This, combined with his monologues about the tricks and his personal experiences, made for a very entertaining night at any theater Cooper would perform at. He would also lace his imperfect magic tricks with legitimate tricks to keep the audience guessing as to what the next part of his act would be. He always had a very professional and lively attitude when performing, and for several decades, Tommy would become a household name in the world of comedy and magic for his incredibly unique act. Somewhere along the way, though, Tommy started smoking and drinking quite heavily, which would not be an immediate health risk for him, but as he started to partake in these activities more often, it would lead to his gradual declining health over the long term. Tommy smoked a lot of cigars. It's reported that he would sometimes smoke upwards of 40 of them a day, while also binge drinking regularly. Some of this heavy alcoholism led to rumors of Tommy being very abusive towards his wife, and also given his monumental status as a star comedian, he'd also built a reputation for being something of a womanizer. Now, these claims are alleged since his daughter Vicky says she never saw him act violently towards her mother, either, so take that information with a grain of salt because it's just a rumor I read on the internet. To top it all off, his rampant alcoholism would lead to him having all sorts of health issues such as indigestion, bronchitis, and chronic back pain. I know we aren't supposed to speak ill of the dead, but I think it's a fair assessment to say this guy had some serious problems. It speaks as a testament to just how truly special Tommy was, though, as an entertainer, because despite all these rumors about his conduct off stage, and then his very real issues with regular alcohol consumption and chain smoking, he would still be widely acclaimed as a dominant force in the world of comedy and continue to build a respectable body of work over his career. He would tour in nearly every country doing his act, and people of all walks of life loved Tommy Cooper. Even as a prop comedian, he would garner all the respect and attention through his quick-witted nature and his many different tricks that would either fail on purpose or succeed and impress the audience. Tommy had a long career of performing on TV from precisely 1948 all the way to 1984, which allowed him to master the art of entertainment. As I mentioned earlier, because of all the work and stress he encountered, he would start all of the unhealthy habits that led to his declining health, and this would end up hurting him in the long run. A lot of people don't know that in this long stretch of activity in Tommy's career, on April 22nd, 1977, he would be doing a show in Rome and it would be going very well. However, during the show, he would suffer a heart attack, but luckily he would receive medical attention as fast as possible and he would end up being okay. With the information we know now, this would end up foreshadowing his later demise in the 80s. Despite this traumatizing event, Tommy would take 3 months to fully recover from the incident before he returned to the road and television. His first appearance back would be on Night Out at the London Casino, a show shot at the Prince Edward Theatre in Westminster, London. Then after 7 more years of making people laugh across the planet, Tommy would shock the world one final time in the worst way possible. On April 15th, 1984, literally 1 week shy of 7 years since his first heart attack in Rome, Tommy would be performing on Live from Her Majesty's, a variety show on London weekend television. When halfway through his act, he would collapse and fall over on stage after suffering from a heart attack. In a horrifyingly ironic twist, the live audience would roar with laughter because they believed this was part of Tommy's act, and it must have been very convincing because even Tommy's assistant backstage, who was helping him with props, believed that it was part of his routine. Little did these people know, Tommy was fighting for his life in front of not only them, but 12 million additional viewers all over the world who were watching this horrifying incident. After not standing up and Tommy becoming increasingly less responsive, the host of the show and the TV director made a horrifying realization that this was not part of the act and that Tommy was in a fight to stay alive and needed immediate medical attention. The audience would eventually stop laughing as they realized that Tommy was unable to get up and that something was seriously wrong with him. The production staff had asked Tommy's son if his falling over was part of the show, but he informed them that Tommy had a bad back after long years of constant alcoholism and chain smoking, and that if he fell down, he would not be able to get back up. The orchestra was then cued to play music for an unplanned commercial break, and then the people behind the curtains would immediately reach for Tommy to pull him backstage. Sadly, the entire thing was on video, and millions of people who wanted to see comedy would instead see the deeply saddening final moments of a comedy legend. I will not be including the video out of respect for him and his family, but if you are morbidly curious, I will tell you that you can find the video on YouTube. It is very disturbing though, so proceed with caution if you do plan on seeing it. Because of the dramatic nature of the situation, 2 other comedians named Dustin G and Les Dennis were instructed to continue the show, while the staff behind the curtain was urgently performing CPR to try and save Tommy's life. These attempts would remain futile though, because after many attempts to revive Tommy, he would stay unconscious. After what felt like an eternity, an ambulance arrived at the theater and rushed Tommy to the Westminster Hospital, where they did everything in their power to resuscitate Tommy. Despite their best efforts, Tommy was pronounced dead on arrival, but the press would not announce his death until the very next day, when the situation would be covered repeatedly given the shocking and graphic nature of his demise. This was a tragic event in the world of comedy, because even though prop comedy gets a bad rap at times, Tommy truly was something very special. Tommy's influence was far and widespread because in 2005, a poll titled The Comedian's Comedian, voted on by comedians and comedy insiders, would choose Tommy Cooper as the 6th greatest comedy act of all time. He might not have been a huge practitioner of the traditional stand-up comedy format that we're used to in America, practiced by people like Jerry Seinfeld and Chris Rock and Brian Regan, but it doesn't change the fact that he was truly an incredibly special performer. To prove that further, many years after his death, English actor Sir Philip Anthony Hopkins would unveil a statue in the birthplace of Tommy Cooper in Wales to honor the legacy he left behind as a world-class entertainer. In the long story of Tommy Cooper, it truly is a tragedy that it had to end on such an unfortunately poor note. However, as corny as it might be to say, I'm happy that he got to spend his entire life doing what he was truly passionate about until his very last breath. May Tommy Cooper rest in peace. I'd love to hear what you guys think in the comments down below. Before this video, did you know who Tommy Cooper was? Were you a fan of his? Did you think his use of props was corny or unwarranted? Or is his comedy magic not really your cup of tea? Make sure to leave your thoughts down below. Also, if you guys enjoyed the video, make sure to give me a thumbs up, and if you're new to the channel, make sure to subscribe. I also have some bonus content on my Patreon. They also got to see this video first before it was on YouTube. This was Tommy Cooper, the comedian that died on stage.